An 11-year-old fought tears while testifying for his accused parents. When he described their morning routine, the judge removed his glasses and couldn't look away. The clock showed 5:30 a.m. when Isaiah Williams's bare feet hit the cold floor of his bedroom. His mom's voice had barely finished calling his name from the kitchen of their Brooklyn apartment, but he was already up. The familiar smell of bacon drifted through the crack under his door. "Coming, Mom," Isaiah called out, his voice still rough with sleep. He pulled on his favorite blue t-shirt, the one with a small hole near the collar that his mom kept promising to fix. The kitchen was warm and bright. Sarah Williams stood at the stove, her work boots already on, hair tied back neat and tight. She turned when Isaiah walked in, spatula in hand, and smiled. "There's my early bird. Help me pack your father's lunch?" Isaiah nodded, heading straight for the cabinet where they kept the plastic containers. The routine was as familiar as his own reflection. Containers laid out on the counter, last night's leftovers divided carefully, one sandwich for Dad, one for Mom. The bacon sizzled in the background. "Your father's got that big project starting today," Sarah said, cracking eggs into the pan. "Thompson Construction's biggest contract this year." Isaiah watched the eggs bubble and firm up. "Is that why Dad left so early?" Had to be on site by 5 to prep everything." Sarah slid the eggs onto 3 plates. "He'll be home late tonight, but tomorrow we'll all have dinner together." The front door creaked open before Isaiah could respond. James Williams's heavy boots thumped against the welcome mat. "Forgot my thermos," he called out, his deep voice carrying through their small apartment. Isaiah grabbed the red thermos from the dish rack. "Got it, Dad." James appeared in the kitchen doorway, construction dust already on his navy work shirt. His broad shoulders filled the frame, and despite the early hour, his eyes were alert and focused. "Thanks, son." He ruffled Isaiah's hair, then kissed Sarah's cheek. "Smells good in here?" "Sit down for 5 minutes," Sarah insisted. "You need more than coffee in your system." James glanced at his watch, but sat down anyway. Isaiah watched his parents exchange a look he couldn't quite read. Something felt different this morning, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Through the thin walls, voices drifted in from the hallway. Their neighbors, the Petersons, were arguing again. But this time, Isaiah caught his family's name in their heated whispers. "The Williams, yeah. You hear what they're saying at the site?" "Sure." "The Walls, Martha." Isaiah's fork paused halfway to his mouth. His father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his mother's hands stilled on the counter. "Eat up, Isaiah," Sarah said, her voice too bright. "You'll be late for school." The rest of breakfast passed in unusual silence. Isaiah noticed his father checking his phone more than usual, thumb scrolling quickly through messages. Sarah kept glancing at the clock, then at James, then back at the clock. Walking to school later that morning, Isaiah couldn't shake the weird feeling in his stomach. It wasn't until he passed Thompson Construction's main site that everything changed. 2 police cars were parked outside, their lights silent, but their presence loud. Isaiah slowed his steps, watching workers gather in small groups, all of them looking toward the site office. He recognized Mr. Thompson's silver Lexus parked crookedly near the entrance, as if he'd arrived in a hurry. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. Last semester, when Mrs. Peterson accused him of stealing Jessica's calculator during math class. The same sick feeling in his stomach, the same whispers behind hands, the same assumptions made because of who he was, what he looked like. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom. "Come straight home after school today. No library." Isaiah typed back, "Okay," with shaking fingers, then forced himself to keep walking. But he couldn't help looking back one more time at the construction site, where a police officer was now leading someone toward one of the cruisers. The man's head was down, but Isaiah would know those Navy work clothes anywhere. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Isaiah barely heard his teachers, couldn't focus on his assignments. When he finally got home, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, her work clothes still on, staring at nothing. "Mom?" His voice cracked. Sarah looked up, and Isaiah saw she'd been crying. "Sit down, baby. We need to talk about your father. Is he coming home?" Yes, she said quickly, reaching for his hand. "He'll be home soon. They're just asking him some questions about some missing materials from the site." Isaiah's throat felt tight. "But Dad wouldn't." No, he wouldn't, Sarah cut in firmly. And we're going to prove that. But things might be hard for a while. People might say things. She squeezed his hand. We just have to stay strong. Together, when James finally came home that night, long after dinner had gone cold, Isaiah pretended to be asleep. But he heard everything through his bedroom wall. His father's tired voice explaining about accusations of stolen construction materials, his mother's muffled sobs, words like lawyer and evidence and court date floating through the darkness. Isaiah pulled his pillow over his head, but he couldn't block out the truth. Their normal life, their quiet routine, had shattered like a glass dropped on concrete. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this was just the beginning. He lay awake long after his parents went to bed, listening to the city sounds outside his window, wondering how tomorrow could possibly be anything like normal again. The clock on his nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. when he finally drifted off, his dreams full of flashing lights and whispered accusations. In the morning, everything would be different. But for now, in the dark of night, Isaiah could still pretend it had all been just a bad dream. Morning came too soon. Isaiah's alarm blared at 6:30 a.m., but he was already awake, staring at the ceiling. The apartment felt different, quieter, heavier. No bacon smell today. No coffee machine humming. He found his mother at the kitchen table, still in her pajamas, phone in hand. "Mom, aren't you going to work?" Sarah looked up, dark circles under her eyes. "Not today, baby. Mr. Thompson. He suggested we take some time off until this is sorted out." "What about Dad?" "He's meeting with a lawyer." She tried to smile but failed. "Come eat something before school." Isaiah poked at his cereal, watching it get soggy. "Maybe I should stay home too." "No." Sarah's voice was firm. "We keep going like normal, head held high. Remember what your father always says?" "William's men don't hide," Isaiah mumbled. The walk to school felt longer than usual. Every passing car made him tense. Every stranger's glance felt like an accusation. When he finally reached the school gates, Marcus Jenkins was waiting. "Yo, Isaiah," Marcus called out, too loud. "Heard your old man's a thief." Isaiah's hands clenched into fists. Other kids turned to look. "My dad says your whole family's probably been stealing," Marcus continued, grinning. "Says that's how you afford those new sneakers." "These are from last Christmas," Isaiah said through gritted teeth. "And my dad's not a thief." Sure. Marcus stepped closer. "Hey, everybody, watch your stuff around. William's stealing must run in the family." Something snapped inside Isaiah. His backpack hit the ground, but before he could move, a hand grabbed his shoulder. "Mr. Williams, Mr. Jenkins, my office now." Principal Hayes' voice cut through the tension. 20 minutes later, Isaiah sat across from Hayes' desk, arms crossed. The principal sighed, removing his glasses. "Isaiah, I understand this is a difficult time, Dash. You don't understand anything," Isaiah interrupted. "My dad's innocent. That's not for me to decide." Hayes leaned forward. "But fighting won't help your situation. I'm giving you both detention." "But Marcus started it." "And you chose to escalate." Hayes put his glasses back on. "I've called both your parents. Your mother's coming to pick you up. Take the rest of the day to cool off." In the hallway, Marcus smirked as he passed. "See you in detention, criminal." Sarah was already waiting in the office when Isaiah emerged. She signed him out without a word. The silence continued until they were halfway home. "I'm sorry," Isaiah finally said. "I know, baby." Sarah's voice was tired. "But we can't let them provoke us. We have to be stronger than that." When they got home, a man in a cheap suit was waiting by their door. "Mrs. Williams?" "I'm Steve Porter, your court-appointed attorney." Isaiah watched his mother's shoulders straighten. "Come in, Mr. Porter." The lawyer spread papers across their kitchen table, while Isaiah pretended to do homework in the living room. But he could hear everything. "The evidence against James is circumstantial, but concerning," Porter was saying. "Material deliveries that don't match inventory, signatures on forms that look altered." "But he's innocent," Sarah insisted. "The DA is offering a plea deal. 6 months, maybe less with good behavior. No." Sarah's voice cracked. "We're not pleading guilty to anything." The front door opened. James walked in, looking older than he had yesterday. "Dad!" Isaiah jumped up. James hugged him tight, then looked at Porter. Any news? We were just discussing options, Porter said carefully. The plea deal dash, no deals. James sat down heavily. I won't admit to something I didn't do. That night, Isaiah couldn't sleep again. His parents' voices carried through the walls. Maybe we should consider the deal, Sarah was saying. 6 months, we could survive that. And then what? James's voice was bitter. I'll have a record. No construction company will hire me. Isaiah will always be the kid whose dad went to jail. A knock at their door made everyone freeze. Isaiah crept to his bedroom door listening. Mrs. Peterson? Sarah's voice was surprised. It's nearly midnight dash. I'm sorry, but Tommy can't play with Isaiah anymore, Mrs. Peterson said quickly. We can't risk. You understand? The door closed. Isaiah heard his mother slide down against it, crying softly. The next day at school, Tommy wouldn't meet his eyes in the hallway. Isaiah sat alone at lunch, picking at his sandwich. That's when he overheard 2 teachers talking near the vending machines. The Williams boy. Shame about his parents. But did you hear? He might testify. Can they allow that? He's just a child. Isaiah's head snapped up. Testify? He could help? After school, he went straight to the public library. The librarian, Mrs. Chun, didn't ask questions when he requested books about juvenile court testimony. She just pointed him to the right section. For hours, Isaiah read everything he could find. His phone buzzed with texts from his mom asking where he was, but he kept reading. One sentence jumped out. In cases involving family members, children as young as 7 may be permitted to testify with the court's approval. On his way home, passing the courthouse, Isaiah overheard 2 clerks talking outside. William's case is a mess, one said, shaking his head. Half the delivery logs are missing. Convenient, right? Thompson's trying to bury something, the other replied. But who's going to believe Dash? They noticed Isaiah and stopped talking. But he'd heard enough. That night, at dinner, Isaiah cleared his throat. I want to testify. His parents' forks clattered against their plates. Absolutely not, James said immediately. But I can help. I know everything about your schedule. Your work dash. Isaiah, no. Sarah reached for his hand. The court is not a place for children. I'm not a child. Isaiah stood up. They're lying about you, and I can prove it. Why won't you let me help? He ran to his room, slamming the door. Through his tears, he pulled out the library books he'd hidden in his backpack. If his parents wouldn't let him help openly, he'd prepare in secret. The clock ticked past midnight as Isaiah practiced what he'd say in court, whispering his testimony to the darkness. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, and somewhere in the city, decisions were being made that would change everything. But Isaiah had made a decision too. No matter what anyone said, he would fight for his family. He just hoped he was strong enough for what was coming. Isaiah woke up with library books scattered across his bed. He'd fallen asleep reading about court procedures, his notebook filled with practice statements. The morning sun cast long shadows across his messy room, and he could hear his parents talking in low voices in the kitchen. This was it. No more hiding. He gathered his courage and walked into the kitchen, books clutched to his chest. His parents stopped talking the moment he appeared. Mom, Dad, Isaiah said, his voice stronger than he felt. We need to talk about me testifying. James set down his coffee cup. Son, we already discussed this dash. No, you discussed it. You didn't listen to me. Isaiah dropped the books on the table. I've been studying. Kids my age can testify. I know all your schedules, your routines. I can prove you've never stolen anything. Sarah picked up one of the books, surprise crossing her face. You got these from the library? Mrs. Chun helped me find them. Isaiah took a deep breath. The trial's in 2 weeks. Mr. Porter says they don't have enough witnesses. But I could be one. I can help. His parents exchanged a look he knew well, the one they used when making difficult decisions. Sit down, Isaiah, James said finally. Let's literally talk about this. Isaiah's heart pounded as he took a seat. His father looked tired, older somehow, but his eyes were sharp. Tell us what you know, James said quietly. Words poured out of Isaiah. He described his father's morning routines, every detail he'd observed over years of early breakfasts. He listed the exact times his dad checked inventory, the way he double-checked every delivery form, how he stayed late to verify supplies were secured. And Mom, Isaiah continued, turning to Sarah. You handle all the paperwork at home. I've seen you checking receipts, matching numbers. You wouldn't let Dad throw away a single delivery slip. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You noticed all that? I notice everything. Isaiah's voice cracked. And so will the jury, if you let me tell them. A knock at the door made them all jump. Mr. Porter stood outside, briefcase in hand, looking more rumpled than usual. Good morning, he said, stepping inside. We need to discuss some developments. They gathered around the kitchen table, Isaiah refusing to leave despite his mother's pointed look. The DA's office is pushing for a quick trial, Porter explained, spreading papers across the table. They've moved up the date. We now have 8 days. 8 days? Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. But our witnesses dash. That's the other problem. Porter loosened his tie. Mike from the loading dock, the one who could verify the delivery schedules, he's backing out. Says he can't risk his job. James slammed his fist on the table. He knows I'm innocent. He was there every morning. People are scared, James. Porter wiped his forehead. Thompson Construction is the biggest employer in the area. Going against them, I'm not scared. Isaiah's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Porter, I want to testify. Porter blinked, noticing Isaiah for the first time. You're what, 11? He's been studying the legal requirements, Sarah said softly, pushing the library books toward Porter. The lawyer picked them up, eyebrows rising. You've been doing research? Isaiah nodded. I know what happened. Every morning, every delivery. I can prove Dad's innocent. Porter flipped through Isaiah's notebook, reading his practice testimony. This is actually quite detailed. He looked at James and Sarah. The jury might respond well to this. A child's testimony, if handled correctly, it's too dangerous, James protested. The prosecutor will tear him apart. Dad, I can handle it. Isaiah stood up. You always taught me to stand up for what's right. How is this different? The room fell silent. Isaiah could hear his own heart beating. Let me talk to the judge, Porter said finally. See if he'll allow it. But he turned to Isaiah. You need to understand what you're getting into. The prosecutor will ask hard questions. Try to confuse you. Make you look like you're lying. I don't care. Isaiah lifted his chin. I know the truth. After Porter left, Isaiah's parents called him into the living room. They sat on either side of him on the worn couch. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, taking his hand. Really sure? Isaiah squeezed her hand. I'm scared, he admitted. But I'm more scared of what happens if I don't try. James wrapped an arm around both of them. Porter says the prosecutor will try to block your testimony. Says we shouldn't get our hopes up. Then we'll fight that too, Isaiah said firmly. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Porter came by every evening, helping Isaiah practice his testimony. They worked on staying calm under pressure, answering only what was asked, keeping his voice steady. But at night, alone in his room, the fear crept in. Isaiah would lie awake, stomach churning, wondering if he was really strong enough to face a courtroom full of adults who wanted to destroy his family. The night before the hearing to determine if he could testify, Isaiah couldn't sleep at all. Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. His door creaked open. Can't sleep? Sarah asked softly. Isaiah shook his head. Sarah sat on his bed, smoothing his hair like she used to when he was little. We can still say no, she whispered. No one would blame you. I would blame me? Isaiah sat up. Can we pray? Like we used to? Sarah smiled through tears, pulling him close. They prayed together, whispered words in the darkness, asking for strength, for justice, for truth to prevail. Morning came too soon. Isaiah stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the tie his father had taught him to knot. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Isaiah! James called from the living room. It's time. He took one last look at his reflection. The boy in the mirror looked scared but determined. In a few hours, he'd know if he'd be allowed to fight for his family's future. Isaiah touched the lucky penny in his pocket, the one his father had given him years ago, and walked out to face whatever came next. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of hope and fear, as the Williams family headed toward the courthouse, together. The courthouse lobby felt bigger than Isaiah remembered. Every footstep echoed against the marble floors. and the ceiling seemed to stretch up forever. His new shoes, bought specially for court, squeaked with each step. "Remember what we practiced," Mr. Porter whispered, guiding them toward courtroom 3B. "Judge Morrison can seem harsh, but he's fair." Isaiah nodded, his throat too dry to speak. His parents walked behind them, close enough that he could hear his mother's nervous breathing. Two large wooden doors loomed ahead. A court officer stood guard, checking their names against his list. "Williams' testimony hearing," he announced, pushing the doors open. The courtroom was already full. Isaiah recognized some faces. Workers from Thompson Construction, neighbors, even a few teachers from school. They all stared as he walked down the center aisle. "All rise," the bailiff called out. "The Honorable Judge Morrison presiding." Everyone stood. Isaiah's legs felt wobbly as an older man in black robes entered from a side door, climbing the steps to his bench. Judge Morrison had thick gray eyebrows and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Be seated," the judge said, his voice filling the room. "We're here to determine if minor Isaiah Williams may testify in the case of State versus James and Sarah Williams." He peered down at Isaiah. "Young man, approach the bench." Isaiah's feet felt like lead as he walked forward. The judge's bench towered over him. "State your name and age for the record," Judge Morrison said. "Isaiah Williams, Your Honor. I'm 11 years old. Do you understand what it means to testify under oath?" Isaiah stood straighter. "Yes, Your Honor. It means I promise to tell the whole truth. And if I lie, I can be punished." The prosecutor, a tall woman in a sharp suit, stood up. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He's a child clearly coached by his parents. I wasn't coached." Isaiah blurted out, then quickly added, "Sorry, Your Honor." Judge Morrison's lips twitched. "Ms. Reynolds, let's hear the boy out." He turned back to Isaiah. "Why do you want to testify?" "Because I know the truth," Isaiah said, his voice shaking slightly. "I've watched my parents work hard every day. I know their schedules, their routines. I can prove they didn't steal anything." "Your Honor," Ms. Reynolds interrupted again. "The boy's emotional attachment to his parents makes him an unreliable witness." "And what about everyone else's emotional attachment to Thompson Construction?" Isaiah asked before he could stop himself. The courtroom went silent. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Explain what you mean." Isaiah swallowed hard. "Mike from the loading dock won't testify because he's scared of losing his job. Our neighbors won't talk to us anymore because they're scared. But I'm not scared of telling the truth." The judge studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Porter, your thoughts?" Porter stood. "Your Honor, Isaiah has extensively prepared for this. His testimony could provide crucial insights into his parents' daily routines and character. The law allows for minor testimony in family cases. I'm aware of the law," Judge Morrison cut in. He turned back to Isaiah. "The prosecutor will not be gentle with you. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." Isaiah met his eyes. "But my parents taught me that sometimes doing the right thing is hard." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "Ms. Reynolds, you'll have your chance to cross-examine, but I'm allowing the testimony." He banged his gavel. "Court is in recess until 2 p.m., at which time we'll begin with the boy's testimony." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Isaiah's legs nearly gave out as he walked back to his parents. His mother pulled him into a tight hug. "You did great, baby," she whispered. "So great." During the recess, they gathered in a small conference room. Porter paced back and forth while Isaiah tried to eat the sandwich his mother had packed. "The prosecutor will try to trip you up," Porter warned. "She'll ask confusing questions, try to make you angry. Remember, only answer what's asked," Isaiah recited. "Stay calm. If I don't understand, ask for clarification." "Good." Porter checked his watch. "Almost time." In the bathroom, Isaiah splashed cold water on his face. His reflection looked pale and scared. "Williams' men don't hide," he whispered to himself. The afternoon session began exactly at 2 p.m. Isaiah sat in the witness box, his feet barely touching the floor. The bailiff approached with a Bible. "Place your right hand on the Bible," the bailiff instructed. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God?" "I do." Isaiah's voice cracked. Porter approached first, his smile encouraging. "Isaiah, Can you tell us about your father's morning routine? He gets up at 4:30 every morning, Isaiah began. Mom makes breakfast while he showers. He has to be at the site by 5 to unlock everything and check the security logs dash. Objection. Ms. Reynolds stood. He can't possibly know about security logs dash. I do know. Isaiah insisted. Dad brings them home sometimes. Shows me how everything has to match up. He says it's important to always double-check your work. Judge Morrison nodded. Overruled. Continue. For 20 minutes, Isaiah described his parents' routines in detail. He explained how his father labeled every delivery, how his mother kept copies of all paperwork, how they discussed work over dinner every night. Then Ms. Reynolds stood up. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached. That's a very nice story, Isaiah, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. But isn't it possible you're remembering things wrong? Or perhaps your parents only showed you what they wanted you to see. No, ma'am. Isaiah's hands gripped the witness box. I see everything. Everything. She raised an eyebrow. Like the missing materials? The altered delivery forms? Objection. Porter called. She's badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Ms. Reynolds, proceed carefully. The questioning continued. Isaiah's head began to hurt from concentrating so hard. Ms. Reynolds kept jumping between dates and times, trying to confuse him. His vision blurred. His voice came out as a whisper. I need a break, please. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Are you all right, son? Isaiah shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. The room spun slightly. 15-minute recess, the judge announced, banging his gavel. The bailiff helped Isaiah down from the witness box. His parents rushed forward, but the prosecutor's voice stopped them. If he can't handle simple questions, Your Honor, perhaps he shouldn't be testifying at all. Isaiah turned around. I can handle it, he said, wiping his eyes. I just needed a minute. In the hallway, he slumped against the wall. His father knelt beside him. You don't have to go back in, James said softly. Yes, I do. Isaiah straightened up. She's trying to make me look like a baby. But I'm not. The bailiff, an older man with kind eyes, brought him a cup of water. You're doing good, kid. Just remember, you're the one who knows the truth. Don't let them shake that. When they returned to the courtroom, Isaiah felt steadier. He climbed back into the witness box, took a deep breath, and faced Ms. Reynolds again. Ready to continue? She asked. Isaiah looked at his parents, then at Judge Morrison, and finally at the prosecutor. His voice came out clear and strong. Yes, ma'am. I'm ready. Ms. Reynolds paced in front of the witness box, her heels clicking against the floor. Let's talk about mornings, Isaiah. You say your father leaves at exactly 4:45 a.m. every day. Yes, ma'am. Isaiah sat up straighter. He has to be at the site by 5 o'clock to open up. And you're always awake to see this? Yes. I help Mom make his lunch while she makes breakfast. Every single morning? Ms. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. You never sleep in? Never get sick? Isaiah gripped the edge of the witness box. Sometimes I sleep in, but I can hear him leave. The front door squeaks. It needs oil. And his work boots make a specific sound on our floors. In the gallery, Isaiah noticed Mr. Thompson shift uncomfortably in his seat. The construction company owner kept checking his phone, his face tense. Let's talk about these work boots, Ms. Reynolds continued. You mentioned your father comes home with construction dust on them. Couldn't that dust be from anywhere? Maybe from other construction sites? No, ma'am. Dad only works at Thompson sites. He says loyalty is important. Loyalty. Ms. Reynolds smiled without warmth. Yet we have evidence of materials disappearing under his supervision. How do you explain that? Objection. Porter stood. The prosecution is asking the witness to speculate. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Rephrase your question, Ms. Reynolds. She turned back to Isaiah. Have you ever seen your father bring construction materials home? Only small things he bought himself. Like when he fixed Mrs. Peterson's porch steps. He showed me the receipt. He always keeps receipts. In the gallery, Isaiah saw Mrs. Peterson look down at her hands. And your mother? Ms. Reynolds pressed. She handles paperwork at home, you said. Ever notice any discrepancies? Isaiah remembered the word from his preparation with Porter. Mom checks everything 3 times. She has a special notebook where she writes down all the numbers. She says math doesn't lie. May I approach the bench, Your Honor? Ms. Reynolds asked suddenly. Judge Morrison nodded. The prosecutor and Porter huddled near the judge, speaking in low voices. Isaiah watched his father lean forward, straining to hear. Very well, Judge Morrison said finally. Proceed, Ms. Reynolds. She returned to her desk and picked up a thick folder. Isaiah, I'm going to show you some delivery forms. These are copies of documents your mother processed. Can you read the dates? Porter stood again. Your Honor, the witness hasn't been established as an expert in document analysis. I'm simply asking him to read dates, Counselor. Ms. Reynolds handed the papers to Isaiah. The highlighted sections. Isaiah looked at the forms. His mother's neat handwriting filled the margins with notes and calculations. March 15th, March 16th, and March 16th again. 2 different delivery forms for the same date, Ms. Reynolds said triumphantly. Both signed by your father. How do you explain that? Isaiah studied the papers carefully. The handwriting's different. Excuse me? On the second March 16th form. It doesn't look like Dad's signature. Isaiah pointed to the page. See? Dad's James always has a loop at the bottom. This one doesn't. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Order! In the back row, a man stood up suddenly. Isaiah recognized him, Mr. Rodriguez from the delivery crew. Your Honor, Mr. Rodriguez called out. I need to say something. Sit down. Ms. Reynolds snapped. This isn't Dash. Let him speak, Judge Morrison ordered. Step forward, sir. Mr. Rodriguez walked to the front, wringing his hard hat in his hands. The boy's right about the signature. I was there that day. Mr. Thompson made Mr. Harris sign some forms using Mr. Williams's name. Said it was to streamline the process. More whispers filled the courtroom. Mr. Thompson's face had gone pale. Your Honor, Ms. Reynolds began, but the judge cut her off. Mr. Rodriguez, you're now a witness in this case. Please wait outside with the bailiff. Judge Morrison turned to Isaiah. Young man, continue examining those forms. What else do you notice? Isaiah's hands shook as he looked at the papers again. Mom's notes, she circled these numbers here and wrote, verify, next to them. She does that when something doesn't add up. And did she verify them? She tried. She called the supplier 3 times. I remember because she was really frustrated that no one called back. In the gallery, Mr. Thompson stood up and hurried toward the door. 2 police officers stepped in his way. Going somewhere, Mr. Thompson? Judge Morrison asked coldly. The construction company owner sank back into his seat, pulling out his phone again. But this time, a court officer stepped forward and confiscated it. Ms. Reynolds huddled with her team, papers rustling frantically. Isaiah watched his father reach for his mother's hand. Your Honor, Porter stood. In light of Mr. Rodriguez's statement and this new evidence, we move 4 dash. Not yet, Counselor. Judge Morrison held up his hand. Ms. Reynolds, do you have any further questions for this witness? The prosecutor looked at her notes, then at Mr. Thompson, then back at Isaiah. No, Your Honor. No further questions. Very well. The judge turned to Isaiah. Young man, you've demonstrated remarkable attention to detail and integrity. Is there anything else you'd like to tell this court? Isaiah took a deep breath. Just my parents aren't thieves. They taught me that honesty matters more than money. That's why I had to tell the truth today, even though it was scary. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. You may step down. Isaiah's legs felt like jelly as he walked back to his parents. His mother pulled him close, her tears wetting his hair. His father's strong hand gripped his shoulder. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning, Judge Morrison announced. Mr. Thompson, you will remain in the building with the officers. Mr. Rodriguez, please give your full statement to the bailiff. Ms. Reynolds, my chambers. Now, as people filed out of the courtroom, Isaiah noticed faces had changed. Mrs. Peterson wasn't avoiding their eyes anymore. Some of the construction workers nodded as they passed. Even Marcus Jenkins's mother gave him a small smile. In the hallway, Porter was beaming. Isaiah, you noticed things even I missed about those forms and Rodriguez. I never expected Dash. Can we go home? Isaiah interrupted. The events of the day were crashing over him like waves. I'm really tired. Of course, baby, Sarah said softly. You've done more than enough. They walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun. James kept one arm around Sarah, the other around Isaiah. Son, he said quietly, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I'm proud of you. So proud it hurts. Isaiah leaned against his father's side, too exhausted to speak. But in his heart, past the fear and stress and uncertainty, a warm feeling grew. He'd stood up for the truth, just like his parents had taught him. And maybe, just maybe, the truth would be enough to save them all. That night, as Brooklyn's streets grew quiet and the stars emerged above the city lights, Isaiah finally let himself cry. Not from fear or sadness, but from relief. Whatever happened tomorrow, he'd done his best. He'd fought for his family with everything he had. And somewhere in the courthouse, in a judge's chambers filled with scattered papers and hard questions, the wheels of justice were finally turning toward truth. Isaiah couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mr. Thompson's face. That moment when everything started to unravel. Around 2 a.m., he slipped out of bed and tiptoed to get some water. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Not his parents this time. The TV was on low. Breaking news in the Thompson construction scandal, a reporter was saying. Sources say company owner Robert Thompson is now under investigation for widespread fraud. Isaiah peered around the corner. His father sat alone in the dark, watching the news. The blue light from the TV made him look older, tired. Can't sleep either? James asked without turning around. No. Isaiah sat next to him on the couch. Dad, what happens now? James sighed. Honestly, son, I don't know. But whatever happens, you did something amazing today. They sat in comfortable silence until Isaiah's eyes grew heavy. As he headed back to bed, his father's voice stopped him. Isaiah, your mother and I, we never wanted this burden on you. We wanted to protect you. I know, Dad, but sometimes kids have to protect their parents too. Morning came too soon. They arrived at the courthouse early, but a crowd had already gathered. News vans lined the street, reporters clutching microphones and coffee cups. Mr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, they called out as the family approached. Any comment on the allegations against Mr. Thompson? Porter met them at the courthouse steps. Don't say anything, he warned. Big developments overnight. Thompson's been talking to the DA. Inside, the hallway buzzed with activity. Isaiah recognized more faces from Thompson Construction, including Mr. Harris, the man who'd signed his father's name on the forms as they passed the conference room. Ray's voices caught Isaiah's attention. You promised this would work. Mr. Thompson's voice. Now the kid's testimony has ruined everything. If you just stuck to the plan? Another voice. Unfamiliar. The missing materials were supposed to be logged under Dash. Isaiah stopped walking. His father tugged his arm, but he pulled away, moving closer to the door. Isaiah, Sarah whispered. We should dash. The door flew open. A man Isaiah didn't recognize stormed out, nearly knocking him over. Their eyes met for a brief second. The man's face went pale. Hey! The man pointed at Isaiah. You! What did you hear? Nothing. Isaiah backed away. I was just walking, Dash. The man grabbed his arm. Listen here, you little Dash. James moved faster than Isaiah had ever seen him move. One moment the man was gripping Isaiah's arm. The next he was against the wall, James's forearm across his chest. Touch my son again, James growled, and they'll need a new courtroom to try my case. Understand? James, no. Sarah pulled him back. Not now. Court officers rushed forward, separating everyone. Porter appeared, looking frantic. What happened? Is everyone okay? That man, Isaiah pointed with a shaking hand. He was talking to Mr. Thompson about missing materials and logs and Dash. Wait. Porter's eyes narrowed. That's Daniel Cooper, Thompson's head of accounting. He wasn't supposed to be here today. He turned to the nearest officer. We need to speak to Judge Morrison immediately. The next hour passed in a blur. Isaiah sat in a small conference room with his parents while Porter went back and forth between meetings. Finally, the lawyer burst in, his tie askew but his eyes bright. Cooper cracked, he announced. Started talking the moment they questioned him. Seems he and Thompson had quite the scheme going. falsifying records, double billing for materials, using James's signature to cover their tracks. Sarah grabbed James's hand. Then, the DA is dropping all charges against you. Porter grinned. They're filing new ones against Thompson and Cooper instead. Isaiah felt dizzy with relief. His mother started crying, and his father looked like he might too. But Porter held up a hand. We're not done. Judge Morrison wants to hear one more statement from Isaiah. What? Why? James protested. If the charges are dropped, because what he overheard this morning matters. And because... Porter looked at Isaiah with respect. The judge says he's never seen a young witness handle himself so well. He wants to hear Isaiah's final thoughts before he makes his ruling on Thompson's bail. Back in the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed completely. Mr. Thompson sat with a different lawyer now, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face ashen. Cooper was nowhere to be seen. Judge Morrison called Isaiah to the stand one last time. The familiar wooden box felt less intimidating now. Young man, the judge said kindly, I understand you overheard something this morning. Please tell the court exactly what you heard. In your own words, Isaiah described the conversation, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. He noticed Ms. Reynolds, now sitting in the gallery, taking rapid notes. And this man, Mr. Cooper, grabbed you? Yes, sir, that's when my dad... Isaiah glanced at his father. Dad protected me. Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Isaiah, throughout these proceedings, you've demonstrated remarkable courage and clarity. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we conclude? Isaiah looked at Mr. Thompson, then at his parents, then back at the judge. My dad always says that the truth comes out eventually. I guess he was right. Indeed he was. Judge Morrison smiled slightly. You may step down. And Isaiah, thank you for your service to this court. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Thompson was denied bail. Cooper had already agreed to testify against him. The DA formally apologized to James and Sarah. Outside the courthouse, the sun felt warmer somehow. Reporters shouted questions, but Porter kept them moving. Mr. Williams, a familiar voice called out. They turned to see Mr. Thompson's secretary running toward them, clutching a folder. Please wait. She caught up, out of breath. The company records, the real ones. I kept copies of everything. I wanted to come forward earlier, but she thrust the folder at James. Maybe this will help make things right. On the drive home, Isaiah sat quietly in the back seat, watching Brooklyn pass by. His mother kept wiping her eyes, and his father hadn't stopped smiling. Isaiah. Sarah turned around in her seat. You hungry, baby? We should celebrate. But Isaiah was already half asleep, the exhaustion of the past days finally catching up to him. Through heavy eyelids, he saw his father watching him in the rearview mirror. Let him rest, James said softly. Our boys earned it. That evening, their small apartment filled with neighbors bringing food and apologies. Mrs. Peterson hugged Sarah for a full minute. Mr. Rodriguez brought his whole family. Even Marcus Jenkins came by with his mother, mumbling an awkward sorry. But Isaiah barely noticed. He sat on the fire escape, watching the sunset paint the city gold. Tomorrow, his parents would go back to work, with promotions according to Porter. Life would return to normal. Yet something had changed, not just in the big things, the clear names, the exposed truth, but in the small moments too. In the way his father looked at him with new respect. In the way his mother's worried frown had disappeared. In the way Isaiah himself felt, knowing he'd faced his fears and won. A police car drove by below, lights flashing silently. Somewhere in the city, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Cooper were spending their first night in custody. Justice, Isaiah realized, didn't always come in grand moments. Sometimes it came in small victories, in quiet truths, in the courage to stand up when everyone else sat down. He touched the lucky penny in his pocket, the one that had seen him through 2 days of testimony. Maybe he'd keep it, a reminder of these days. Or maybe he'd give it to the next kid who needed a little extra courage. The New York sky darkened to purple, then to star-studded black. Behind him, he could hear laughter and conversation spilling from the apartment. His mother called his name, probably wanting him to eat something. Isaiah smiled. It was time to go back inside, back to his family, back to the life they'd fought so hard to protect. He took one last look at the city lights, then turned toward home, letting the warmth and love wash over him like a blessing. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Isaiah sat on a hard wooden bench, watching people file into courtroom 3B. Today was different. Today wasn't about his parents anymore. It was about making sure Mr. Thompson and Mr. Cooper faced justice. "Remember," Porter said, straightening Isaiah's tie, "just tell them what you heard in that hallway. Nothing more, nothing less." Isaiah nodded, his throat dry. The past week had been a whirlwind. After his parents' charges were dropped, the DA's office had worked overtime building their case against Thompson and Cooper. Now, at the bail hearing, Isaiah would give his final testimony. "All rise." Judge Morrison entered, his black robe swishing as he took his seat. Isaiah noticed he looked tired, like he hadn't slept much either. "Be seated," the judge said. "We're here to determine bail for Robert Thompson and Daniel Cooper in light of new evidence." He peered over his glasses. "Ms. Reynolds, you're now prosecuting this case?" The prosecutor stood, looking different somehow, more determined. "Yes, Your Honor. The state has substantial new evidence, including testimony from Mr. Cooper and documents provided by Thompson Construction employees." Thompson's new lawyer, a tall man in an expensive suit, stood up. "Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman with deep ties to the community. He's not a flight risk dash. Save it," Judge Morrison cut in. "I want to hear from Isaiah Williams first." Isaiah's heart jumped. He hadn't expected to be called so soon. His father squeezed his shoulder as he stood. The witness box felt familiar now, but his hands still shook as he sat down. Thompson stared at him from the defense table, his face hard and angry. "Isaiah," Judge Morrison said gently, "tell us exactly what you heard in the hallway yesterday morning." Isaiah took a deep breath. The words came easier this time, flowing like water. "I was walking with my parents when I heard Mr. Thompson yelling in a conference room. He was mad because my testimony had ruined everything. Then Mr. Cooper said something about sticking to their plan and missing materials. And what happened next? Mr. Cooper came out and saw me. He grabbed my arm and Isaiah's voice caught. He tried to scare me, but my dad stopped him." Thompson's lawyer stood. "Objection. This is hearsay from a child who what?" Judge Morrison's voice turned sharp. "Who exposed your client's fraud? Who showed more courage in 2 days than most adults show in a lifetime?" The lawyer sat down, face reddening. Ms. Reynolds approached the witness box. "Isaiah, when Mr. Cooper grabbed you, what exactly did he say?" "He wanted to know what I'd heard. He looked scared." Isaiah rubbed his arm where Cooper had grabbed him. "That's when I knew they were hiding something big." "Your Honor," Ms. Reynolds turned to the judge, "Mr. Cooper has provided a full confession." The conversation Isaiah overheard was about their entire scheme. Falsified records going back 3 years, materials sold on the black market, systematic fraud using forged signatures. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Isaiah saw Mr. Thompson's face go pale. Additionally, Ms. Reynolds continued, producing a thick folder. Thompson Construction's former secretary has provided these records. They show millions in missing materials, all covered up using James Williams's forged signature. Judge Morrison studied the documents. "And Mr. Cooper will testify to all this?" "Yes, Your Honor. He's already given a full statement." Thompson jumped up suddenly, his chair clattering backward. "You can't believe that Snake Cooper. He's lying to save himself. It was all his idea, Mr. Thompson." His lawyer tried to pull him down, but Thompson was beyond control now. He pointed at Isaiah, face red with rage. "This is all your fault. You stupid kid. You should have kept your mouth shut. I built that company from nothing. Nothing." Court officers moved forward as Thompson tried to lunge toward the witness box. Isaiah pressed back in his chair, heart pounding. "Get him out of here!" Judge Morrison's gavel crashed down. "Now!" As they dragged Thompson away, he kept shouting, "You'll regret this. All of you." In the chaos, Isaiah noticed something strange. Mr. Thompson's lawyer wasn't trying to calm his client. Instead, he was quietly packing his briefcase. "Your Honor," the lawyer said when order was restored, "I must withdraw as counsel. My firm can no longer represent Mr. Thompson." Judge Morrison nodded grimly. "Given what we've just witnessed, Bail is denied for both defendants. Mr. Thompson will be remanded to custody. And wait. Isaiah's voice surprised even himself. Your Honor, can I say something else? The judge studied him for a moment, then nodded. Go ahead, son. Isaiah turned to face the gallery, where Thompson's former employees sat. His voice shook but grew stronger with each word. All those people Mr. Thompson hurt, the workers who lost their jobs, the families who got blamed for his crimes, they deserve to know the truth. My dad always says that hiding the truth only makes the lie grow bigger. Maybe if someone had spoken up sooner. He looked at his parents. His mother was crying silently, and his father sat straight-backed proud. I know everyone was scared, Isaiah continued. I was scared too. But being scared doesn't mean you have to be silent. The courtroom was absolutely still. Even Judge Morrison seemed moved. Thank you, Isaiah, the judge said softly. You may step down. As Isaiah walked back to his parents, he passed Thompson's former secretary. She wiped her eyes and whispered, Thank you for being braver than we were. The rest of the hearing passed quickly. Both Thompson and Cooper were denied bail. Trial dates were set. Ms. Reynolds asked Isaiah and his parents to stay available as witnesses. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. But this time, Porter didn't hustle them away. Your son has something to say, he told James and Sarah. Isaiah stepped forward, his parents' hands on his shoulders. The cameras turned toward him, red lights blinking. I just want other kids to know, he said clearly, that telling the truth isn't always easy, but it's always right. And sometimes adults need help remembering that too. Later that evening, as Brooklyn's streets grew quiet, Isaiah sat between his parents on their worn couch. The TV news showed clips from the courthouse, but they weren't watching anymore. Porter says Thompson's company will probably be reorganized, James explained. The honest employees will keep their jobs. They've even offered me a promotion to site manager. And I'll be head of accounting compliance, Sarah added, making sure nothing like this ever happens again. Isaiah leaned against his mother's shoulder, exhausted but content. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Car horns honked. The city moved on, changed but unbroken. Dad? Isaiah asked sleepily. Remember when you said Williams' men don't hide? Yes, son? I think maybe we should change that. Maybe it should be Williams' men stand up for what's right. James hugged him close. I think that's a perfect change. As night fell over Brooklyn, Isaiah drifted off to sleep, safe between his parents. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Reporters wanting interviews, neighbors offering belated support, school to face again. But for now, in this moment, truth had won. Justice had prevailed. And a boy who'd found his courage had helped make it happen. The next morning, Isaiah woke to the sound of voices in the living room. He recognized Porter's quick, energetic tone mixing with his parents' quieter responses. The DA wants to move quickly, Porter was saying. Thompson's other victims are coming forward. The case is solid. Isaiah padded out of his room, still in his pajamas. The adult stopped talking when he appeared. There he is. Porter stood up, waving a newspaper. Front page, Isaiah. You did it. The newspaper showed a photo from yesterday. Isaiah standing between his parents outside the courthouse. The headline read, Young Witness Exposes Construction Fraud. Thompson Construction CO denied bail. They're calling you a hero at the courthouse, Porter continued. Judge Morrison specifically mentioned your testimony in his ruling. Isaiah sat down next to his mother, who wrapped an arm around him. I don't feel like a hero. I was just telling the truth. Sometimes that's the most heroic thing you can do. Porter checked his watch. The DA wants to meet with all of you this morning. Thompson's lawyer reached out about a plea deal. Sarah tensed. He's pleading guilty? He doesn't have much choice. Cooper's testimony, the secretary's documents, Isaiah's evidence. It's overwhelming. James stood up, straightening his tie. He was wearing his best suit, the one he'd bought for court. Let's get this done. The DA's office occupied the top floor of a tall building downtown. Isaiah watched the city shrink below them as the elevator climbed. His stomach felt funny, but not from the height. District Attorney Patricia Chin met them in a large conference room with huge windows. She was shorter than Isaiah expected, but her handshake was firm. Isaiah, she smiled warmly, It's good to finally meet you properly. Your testimony changed everything." Before Isaiah could respond, the door opened. Ms. Reynolds entered, followed by two men in expensive suits. Thompson's new lawyers, Porter whispered to the Williams family. Everyone sat down at the long table. Isaiah found himself directly across from the lawyers, who kept glancing at him uncomfortably. "Let's get straight to the point," D.A. Chin began. "Mr. Thompson is prepared to enter a guilty plea to all charges, with some conditions." One of Thompson's lawyers cleared his throat. "Our client will provide full cooperation, including testimony against others involved in similar schemes across the industry. In exchange, we're asking for consideration during sentencing." "And Mr. Cooper?" Porter asked. "Already signed his plea agreement this morning," Ms. Reynolds replied. "He's getting 15 years. Isaiah listened as the adults discussed years, fines, and restitution. The words swam together until D.A. Chin's voice cut through his thoughts. "Isaiah, you've been very quiet. What do you think?" Everyone turned to look at him. Isaiah swallowed hard. Will the workers get their jobs back? The ones Mr. Thompson fired to cover everything up?" D.A. Chin's expression softened. "Yes. Part of the agreement includes restructuring the company under new management. All wrongfully terminated employees will be reinstated with back pay." Isaiah nodded slowly. "Then it's good. That's what matters." The lawyers exchanged glances. One of them actually looked ashamed. "There's something else," D.A. Chin continued. "The governor's office called. They want to present you with a citation for civic courage. It would mean a ceremony, publicity dash, no." Isaiah surprised himself with how firm his voice sounded. "Thank you, but no. I don't want awards for doing what's right." His parents beamed at him. Even the lawyers looked impressed. The meeting continued for another hour. Papers were signed. Statements were recorded. Through the windows, Isaiah watched clouds drift past, casting shadows on the city below. Finally, it was over. Thompson would plead guilty tomorrow morning. Cooper would testify against others involved. Justice, as Porter kept saying, would be served. In the elevator going down, Sarah hugged Isaiah close. "You know what this means? It's really over." But they discovered it wasn't quite over yet. The courthouse plaza was packed with reporters and TV crews. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams," they called out. "Isaiah, how does it feel knowing Thompson will plead guilty?" "No comments today," Porter tried to guide them through. But the reporters pressed closer. "Isaiah, are you going to accept the governor's award? How does it feel to be called a hero?" Isaiah stopped walking. His parents and Porter looked at him in surprise. "You want to know how it feels?" Isaiah's clear voice carried across the plaza. The reporters fell silent, cameras rolling. "It feels like finally being able to breathe, like waking up without being scared. But mostly it feels like what my parents taught me, that doing the right thing isn't about getting awards or being called a hero. It's about standing up when you see something wrong, even if you're scared, even if it's hard." He took his parents' hands. "Can we go home now?" The crowd parted as they walked to their car. But they hadn't gone far when a voice called out, "Isaiah, wait!" It was Thompson's secretary, running toward them with tears in her eyes. "I had to tell you," she gasped. Thompson signed the plea deal. "It's done. Really done. And..." She wiped her eyes. "The new board wants to rename the company Williams Construction. They say it should be named after people with real integrity." James shook his head. "That's not necessary dash." "Yes, it is," she insisted. "Things are going to be different now. Because of your family. Because of Isaiah." They drove home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The city seemed different somehow. Cleaner, brighter, more just. At their apartment, they found their neighbors had organized a surprise celebration. Mrs. Peterson had baked Isaiah's favorite chocolate cake. Mr. Rodriguez brought his guitar. Even Marcus Jenkins came by, asking shyly if they could be friends again. The small apartment filled with laughter and music. Isaiah watched his parents accept hugs and congratulations, saw the weight of the past weeks finally lift from their shoulders. Later, as the party wound down, Isaiah slipped out to the fire escape. The evening air was cool, and stars were just beginning to appear above the city lights. His father joined him, handing him a piece of cake. "Proud of you, son," James said quietly. "Not just for what you did, but for why you did it." "I learned it from you and Mom," Isaiah replied. about standing up for what's right. They sat together, watching Brooklyn settle into night. Somewhere in the city, Thompson was preparing to face justice. Somewhere, Cooper was revealing more secrets. And somewhere, other kids might be finding their own courage to stand up and speak out. The door creaked open, and Sarah joined them on the fire escape. Room for one more? They scooted over, making space between them. Their little family, together and stronger than ever. As night fell over Brooklyn, Isaiah felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: complete peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new beginnings. But tonight, under the stars, justice had won. Truth had prevailed. And a family that had faced its darkest hour together had emerged into the light. He reached into his pocket, feeling the lucky penny that had seen him through it all. Maybe he didn't need it anymore. Maybe courage wasn't about luck at all. Maybe it was simply about knowing what was right and being brave enough to stand up for it. The morning sun painted Brooklyn in shades of gold as Isaiah opened his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he hadn't dreamed about courtrooms or angry faces. His alarm showed 6:30 a.m. back to normal schedule. The smell of bacon drifted through his door. His mom was cooking again. The familiar sounds of morning filled their apartment. Coffee machine humming, his father's work boots on the floor, the radio playing softly in the kitchen. Isaiah got dressed quickly, pulling on his favorite blue t-shirt, now properly mended. When he entered the kitchen, both his parents looked up and smiled. "There's my early bird," Sarah said, just like she used to. But her smile was brighter now. The worry lines around her eyes faded. "Big day," James said from behind his coffee cup. First day back at the site, as manager. Isaiah helped pack their lunches while Sarah finished cooking. The routine was the same, but everything felt different. Better. "You know," Sarah said, sliding eggs onto plates, "Mr. Thompson's lawyers called last night after you went to bed. The company's official name change goes through today. Williams Construction." Isaiah tested the words. "Sounds weird?" "Good weird," James chuckled. "And guess what? That's secretary, Ms. Martinez. She's been named interim CEO until the board finds a permanent replacement." They ate breakfast together, talking and laughing like they used to. The morning news played on their small TV, but there was no mention of trials or scandals. Life was moving forward. "Ready for school?" Sarah asked, clearing the plates. "Marcus's mom called. They can give you a ride if you want." Isaiah nodded. Things with Marcus had changed too. Yesterday, they'd spent hours playing basketball in the park, like the whole fighting and bullying thing had never happened. The ride to school was different from the silent, tense drives of recent weeks. Marcus chatted about basketball tryouts, his mom sang along to the radio, and Isaiah watched the city wake up through the car window. They passed the construction site, his dad's site now. The Thompson construction sign was already down, waiting to be replaced. Workers waved as they drove by. "My dad got his job back," Marcus said suddenly. "Thanks to your dad's testimony about the wrongful terminations. He starts next week." Marcus's mom nodded. "We owe your family a lot, Isaiah." "Everyone does." At school, Isaiah noticed more changes. Teachers smiled at him in the hallway. Kids who used to whisper behind his back now wanted to sit with him at lunch. Even Mrs. Peterson, who'd accused him of stealing last semester, stopped him before class. "Isaiah," she said softly, "I want to apologize. Not just for the calculator incident, but for judging without knowing. You taught us all something important." The day passed quickly. In social studies, they were discussing civic responsibility. Isaiah felt his classmates' eyes on him, but it didn't bother him anymore. He wasn't ashamed of what he'd done. After school, he walked to the public library. Mrs. Chun beamed when she saw him. "My favorite young lawyer," she called out. "Come see what just arrived?" She led him to the front desk and pulled out a newspaper. There, in the local section, was a small article. "Thompson Construction becomes Williams Construction. A story of justice and redemption. We're keeping a copy in our archives," Mrs. Chun said proudly, "to remind people that one person can make a difference." Isaiah felt his face grow hot. "I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." She squeezed his shoulder. "Your usual study spot is free if you want it." But Isaiah shook his head. "Actually, I'm meeting someone." Outside, Tommy, his old best friend, waited nervously. They hadn't spoken since Tommy's parents had forbidden their friendship during the trial. "Hey," Tommy said quietly. "Thanks for giving me another chance." They walked to the park together, slowly rebuilding their friendship. Tommy apologized for not standing by him. Isaiah forgave him. Sometimes he was learning moving forward meant leaving the hurt behind. At home that evening, the apartment filled with delicious smells. Sarah was cooking a proper dinner for the first time in weeks. James came home early, still wearing his new manager's badge. "How was the first day?" Sarah asked, kissing him. "Different," James admitted. "Good different. The crews respect what we went through. They're working harder, being more honest. It's like the whole company culture is changing." The doorbell rang. Isaiah opened it to find Mr. Rodriguez and his family, arms full of food. Behind them stood Mrs. Peterson with a cake, and more neighbors crowded the hallway. "We thought we'd have a proper celebration," Mr. Rodriguez explained. "Now that everything's really over." Their small apartment somehow stretched to hold everyone. Kids ran around playing while adults talked and laughed. The community that had once turned its back on them was now closer than ever. During dinner, Mr. Rodriguez stood up and clinked his glass. "To the Williams family," he said, raising his cup, "who taught us that integrity isn't just a word, it's a choice we make every day." Everyone cheered. Isaiah felt his mother's arm around him, saw his father's proud smile. Later, when the guests had gone and the dishes were done, Isaiah sat on the fire escape one last time. The city stretched out before him, lit up like stars had fallen to earth. His father joined him, then his mother. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their city, their home. "You know," James said finally, "I've been thinking about what you said. About changing our families, saying." Isaiah looked up. "From Williams' men don't hide, ? To Williams' family stands up for what's right." James nodded. "Because it wasn't just you, son. It was all of us. Together." Sarah wiped her eyes. "Together," she repeated softly. Isaiah pulled out his lucky penny, the one that had seen him through the darkest days. He held it up, letting it catch the last light of day. "I think someone else might need this more than me now," he said. His parents watched as he carefully placed the penny on the fire escape railing. Maybe another kid would find it. Maybe it would bring them luck or courage, or just a reminder that doing the right thing was always possible. The sun set over Brooklyn, painting the sky in colors of hope. Tomorrow, James would lead his crews with renewed purpose. Sarah would protect the company's integrity from her new office. Isaiah would go to school, play with his friends, just be a kid again. But they were all different now, stronger, wiser, more aware of the power of truth and the importance of standing together. As night fell, Isaiah looked at his parents, at their strong, honest faces lit by the city lights. He thought about everything they'd been through, everything they'd overcome. And he knew, deep in his heart, that no matter what challenges came next, they would face them the same way they'd faced this one. Together, with courage, with truth. And maybe, just maybe, their story would help other families find their own courage to stand up, speak out, and fight for what's right. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. And sometimes all it takes is one person, even a kid, to remind the world that truth still matters. As the stars appeared above Brooklyn, Isaiah Williams smiled. Their story wasn't ending. In many ways, it was just beginning. And this time, they were ready for whatever came next.